The early 2000s. The Xbox, PlayStation 2, Nintendo GameCube, those were the hottest video game consoles around. Limp Bizkit, Smash Mouth, Jennifer Lopez, Janet Jackson, and Usher. These guys were ruling the airwaves, and little did we know that we would be blessed with tons of horror video game movie adaptations as well. Granted, some weren't that great. I'm looking at you, House of the Dead, Doom, and Alone in the Dark. But there were also some really fun films from this genre, Silent Hill and Resident Evil. So at this time, both weren't exactly loved by critics, but they did have their fans and have each spawned sequels. So today, on Horror Revisited, let's take a look at the first Resident Evil film, the spark that ignited a film franchise.
Nice hearing from you, Carlos.
As a kid who grew up in the 90s, I played a lot of video games. When I wasn't kicking butt against my friends on Mario Kart 64, I would always find myself coming back to the good old horror action adventures. Granted, I terrify myself playing Silent Hill and Doom. However, nothing prepared me for the first Resident Evil. Looking back on it now, the game is so tame compared to its many sequels, as well as other horror titles that will scare the socks off of you. But let's give credit where credit is due. The first game paved the way for future titles. Before we had The Last of Us, Resident Evil set up great atmospheric settings, limited resources, and tense gameplay that would create memorable experiences. Come to think of it, I kind of want to go digging around my old room and play it. But maybe later. Let's continue. Back in 1996, Resident Evil, as stated above, was released on the PlayStation 1 to critical fame, as well as being adored by gamers. A German production company by the name of Constantin Films bought the live-action rights for Resident Evil. They would hire Alan B. McElroy to write it. This would be described as an action horror film packed with violence and would be similar to the original game. In this version, there was no mention of the Umbrella Corporation. It followed a special forces team sent by the government to rescue scientists from the famous Mansion lab. They were called in because a SWAT team that was sent earlier would have been wiped out. Eventually, they realize it's a trap and are pawns inside the lab. Unfortunately, this script was rejected. Eventually, George A. Romero would even be involved after his beloved television commercial for the game's sequel, Resident Evil 2. He would write a total of 5 to 6 different scripts, but all would be rejected.
Maybe you're reading it wrong.
Maybe the corporation's keeping a few secrets down here. Something you're not supposed to see.
So let's jump further back into the 90s, 1995 to be exact. A little-known video game movie adaptation was released in theaters. It was called Mortal Kombat. It would go on to become a very commercially successful product and was directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. Anderson had played the first Resident Evil and saw the potential in it. He wrote a script called Undead, which was a ripoff of the game. The bigwigs at Constantin Film loved his idea and had Anderson develop it into a script that we now know as the first Resident Evil film. Later in 2000, Anderson would be announced as director and writer of the film and would enter the pre-production process. During the casting process, Milla Jovovich, Michelle Rodriguez, and James Purefoy would be the first few to sign on to the project. Eric Mabus, as well as others, would eventually join the cast as well. Being a fan of sci-fi action and seeing Milla Jovovich coming back to kick ass again was one of the reasons I was invested in this movie. I say again because she was kicking ass originally in The Fifth Element as Lilu. Production began on March 5, 2001 in Adlersoft Studios in Berlin, as well as its surroundings, including the unfinished Jubenhof Bundenstag train station, Casimir Krampenitz, and the Schloss Lindstedt.
We found a survivor.
And you shot him?
She was crazed. She bit me.
This version of Resident Evil follows the story of Alice, played by Milla Jovovich, an amnesic woman who wakes up in a mysterious mansion. As she explores her surroundings, she encounters a team of commandos led by James Shade, the Great Colin Salmon. The mansion is an entrance to the Hive, an underground research facility owned by the powerful Umbrella Corporation. The facility is in lockdown due to the release of the T-virus, a biological weapon developed by Umbrella. The virus turns the facility staff into flesh-eating zombies, and Alice and the commandos must navigate through the perilous corridors, facing mutated creatures and traps. As the group delves deeper into the Hive's secrets, they uncover the Red Queen, an artificial intelligence overseeing the facility. The Red Queen reveals that the T-virus was released intentionally to contain the outbreak. Throughout their journey, the survivors confront not only the undead, but also the conspiracies of Umbrella, leading to a climactic showdown against the corporation's malevolent forces. So just like in the video game, the Umbrella Corporation served as the primary antagonist. The decision to focus on the corrupt pharmaceutical pharmaceutical conglomerate as the source of the T virus outbreak provided a compelling and narrative backdrop, one that might even feel relevant 22 years later. The film dives headfirst into the unethical experiments conducted by Umbrella, adding layers to the plot and setting the stage for future installments to come.
There's a cure! You're gonna be okay!
I was beginning to worry.
Visuals and special effects were used a lot during the film. Anytime, though, you see a CGI monster on screen, you're completely taken out of the film. It hasn't aged all that well. While we have our own opinions on them, they still contributed to the film's overall visual impact, especially when bringing the mutated creatures and the Red Queen AI to life.
You're all going to die down here.
Anderson hired cinematographer David Johnson, and together they would construct an eerie atmosphere as well as a dark and immersive world. So a little fun fact, professional dancers were hired to star as zombies. This is because they had better control of their body movements. Because of a shortage of manpower and limited number of dancers, some of Capcom's executives and the film's producers would all agree to make appearances as background zombies. Also during the post-production process, the score would be composed by Marco Beltrami and Marilyn Manson. Manson would make the score sound electronic and thought it sounded differently than much of his previous work.
When we first started working with Manson, it was almost like working with a sound designer rather than a composer, because the first thing he played me was like 10 noises, almost like a really up ticking clock, and just strange sounds, and I go, I like that.
So for anyone that's seen this, you'll know there are some truly fantastic scenes that we must talk about. First off, we can't not talk about the laser grid sequence. As the characters are attempting to navigate through the hive, lasers sweep across a corridor, slicing anything in its path. Not only was this intense, but we truly get some great gory moments here, albeit CGI. Another one that comes to mind is the zombie dog attack scene. It introduces the formidable foe and plays like something straight out of the Matrix, making for a tense but exciting action set piece. If you're like me, you love action that takes place on a train. The most recent Mission Impossible film immediately comes to mind. In this film, however, as our characters make it out of the hive, they hop aboard the train that they rode in on and are being chased by an enemy called the Licker. It's a very fast-paced and fun action set piece that I remember being on the edge of my seat in the theater for. Nothing, and I mean nothing, excited my teenage self more than when a good cliffhanger ending would happen. Perfect examples to me are The Matrix Reloaded, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man, and hell, even XXX State of the Union.
I picked the agents. I think we need to go even further off the grid next time. Fresh face, new model. I've got the perfect candidate.
All left me fist pumping my arm in excitement, waiting to see the next installment. The same can be said for this. When Resident Evil ends, we see Alice wake up in an abandoned facility, walking outside to see a desolate Raccoon City. It has clearly been destroyed by the virus, ultimately resulting in an apocalypse. She finds a shotgun and looks ready to take on any foe that stands in her way. To me, this is a perfect way to end it.
The corporation's guilty here, not you. We finally have the proof. And that way, Umbrella can't get away with this.
The film was originally scheduled to release on October 26, 2001, just in time for Halloween, but unfortunately that didn't happen. Not until January 2002 did audiences see the first trailer. Resident Evil's new release date would be March 15, 2002. Sony Pictures was distributing the film in North America through their Screen Gems label. The film opened to $17 million and ranked in second place behind Ice Age. It would go on to gross $40 million domestically and $103 million worldwide. Currently it sits with a score of 35% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the consensus saying, quote, like other video game adaptations, Resident Evil is loud, violent, formulaic, and cheesy, end quote. With critics like Roger Ebert dismissing the film, people like James Cameron would go on to call it his biggest guilty pleasure.
I'm not dead yet.
It was then released on VHS and DVD on July 30th, 2002. It would come with a bunch of documentaries, including 5 featurettes, score composition, costume design, set design, zombie makeup test, and Slipknot's music video for My Plague. 2 years later, a deluxe edition DVD was released, which included new special features, including an alternate ending, and some new featurettes as well as a sneak preview of the upcoming sequel. It would eventually get the HD transfer it so deserved in 2008, alongside Resident Evil Apocalypse and Resident Evil Extinction. We've stated countless times in this episode about the sequels. The first sequel, Resident Evil Apocalypse, would release in 2004, but that's a story for another time.
You're infected. You'll be okay. At I'm not losing you.
So after having seen this film countless times growing up, I can side with James Cameron in calling it a guilty pleasure. While there are plenty of problems, there's also many things right with it too. It successfully captures the essence of the video game series and incorporates iconic elements from the games, including the T-virus outbreak, zombie creatures, and the ominous Umbrella Corporation. It also effectively builds a tense and atmospheric horror setting within the confines of the Umbrella Corporation's underground facility and gives a very chilling atmosphere, much like a survival horror game. The pacing is well managed, maintaining a steady rhythm that builds tension and leads to a satisfying climax. As stated before, both Resident Evil and Silent Hill understood what it means to make a great video game movie adaptation. While Silent Hill is more eerie and has both the better soundtrack and visuals, Resident Evil has better longevity and rewatchability. It's a dumb, fun 2000s action horror film. Mila Jovovich was already a sci-fi action icon, and with this series, she can add a horror action icon to her roster. She portrays a strong lead performance and adds depth to her narrative. While the film wasn't beloved right away by everyone, it did gain a quick following and is a series that has lived on to spawn countless sequels and spin-off films.
Take her to the Raccoon City facility. Then assemble the team. We're reopening the Hive. I want to know what went on down there.
In summary, revisiting Resident Evil is what I would consider to be a good movie. Video game adaptations can be tricky and go either way, but due to its strong performances, well-balanced blend of horror, as well as action, and an engaging plot, it was able to cement itself as not only one of the best game adaptations of the 2000s, but will sit highly on a mantle as one of the best video game movies of all time.
I'm missing you already.